Hi guys, it is April from Getting Hoga With It. Today I wanted to talk to you about everything that I read in June. It was a pretty good reading month, so let's get into it. So I read officially 6 books in June and then I DNF'd one. Just couldn't do that one. So maybe we'll go from like least favorite to most favorite. We'll end on a high. Yes, that sounds good. I guess we should do the DNF first. And that is 6 Weeks by Mur Lafferty. I had been wanting to read this for so long. It is a thriller set in space where people wake up and there's blood all around them. They're in these sleep pods. And they're in these pods because essentially death doesn't really exist anymore, because your psychosis, your brain, all of your memories and thoughts and feelings can be transported basically from one body, if it's old or not doing so hot, to another body that's young and healthy and all of that. So they wake up in their new bodies and it looks like there was major carnage on the ship. I love the premise so much. However, I didn't like the execution whatsoever. There was a lot of joking in between the crew members, basically. And I don't know about you, but if I woke up and there was blood all around me, and it was not normal for this situation, like, I get that death is not a huge deal for these people because they can just be transferred to other bodies. But them waking up with no memory and all of the blood, I feel like I'd be worried more than wanting to make jokes. And the jokes really bothered me. They were annoying. I also listened to this on audiobook, and it was the writer narrating it, and the way that she narrated it made me even more annoyed. I know, because I was like, this is how it sounded in your head, and I just could not go on. I could not go on, so I put down 6 Weeks because no. So I'll be passing that along to maybe someone else who might like it at all. Now, my 2-star was a shocker to me because it's a classic, and it's Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. This is a Jane Eyre retelling, basically. We are following Bertha, who was the mad woman in the attic in Jane Eyre, and we go back and find out about her roots. We meet her on a Caribbean island as a child, and there's really 2 parts of this. I didn't really mind the first part so much. We meet her as a child and the difficulties that she has with her mother. I wish that we had just continued along that storyline, because I would think I would have given this more like 3 stars. This might be more like a 2.5 star for me, but it was the second half that I was just frustrated about. I was, I don't know, shocked, excited, really hopeful to read about Bertha's backstory, because she's kind of a misunderstood woman. She's just labeled as this crazy woman in Jane Eyre, and you know that there's a story there, and so I was so excited that someone picked up that story. And I didn't mind it when she was a little kid, but I always felt removed from her. I never felt empathy for her. I think I had more empathy for her in Jane Eyre, and my memory of Jane Eyre, because it was like the story that I was making up in my head about her. I cared about more than I cared about her in here. And I'm not trying to sound heartless. It really didn't do anything for me, and I wanted it to so badly, but it just missed the mark for me. There's also an insane amount of racism in here. We basically, Bertha comes from a family of slave owners who lose everything. The Black people on this island are incredibly angry with them, which you can completely understand. But there was so much, the characters were so very racist towards these people who had been enslaved. Not all of the characters, I should say, but it just was unsettling. And then when I also didn't care about them, I just felt like this is something that I probably would have DNF'd, but it was so short, 156 pages, that seemed wrong to DNF it. So I read it, but I just didn't love it. I didn't even have any 3 stars. We're moving right to 4 and 5 stars. So this was a good reading month. The next book I want to talk to you about is Mr. Flood's Last Resort, or I think in the UK it's called The Hoarder by Jess Kidd. This was my first Jess Kidd that I had ever read, and I really, really loved it. This is about a woman who works as kind of a caretaker, and she goes to this very enormous house where a very elderly man lives, and he is a hoarder. To the next level, just the descriptions of the house, it was so vivid. I really could picture everything, and I don't know how she did that because it was just full of stuff, just random stuff, and many, many, many cats. So yeah, we meet her when she's going to take care of this man who is he's crotchety, but not in a cute way, and he might be dangerous. So she's always on edge around him. There is also a mystery in this book that we're trying to get to. The lady of the house fell to her death, and we are also trying to discover what happened to a little girl there many years ago. I loved this book. It was strangely quite funny. Everything that I just described, like, not funny, right? But she's able to infuse these little pockets of humor that I just so appreciated. It really did remind me a lot of Joanna Cannon's writing. I just feel like they would be good friends. They should like hang out together as writers. I really, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I also listened to this on audio, and the audio was fantastic. It was so good. So I highly recommend that if you are thinking of an audiobook that you want to read next. This would be a great one. I should mention, sorry, before I go, I should mention there is a little bit of magical realism in here. Our main character can see saints, and saints kind of follow her around, and they're characters in and of themselves. I didn't love that aspect, but I also don't really love magical realism, if I'm being honest. So if you are cool with magical realism, you might find it even better. You might give it a 5-star because of that aspect of it. The other 4-star that I read this month was Hyperbole and a Half. It is little short stories of this woman's life, her childhood, her current life. She really deep dives into depression and anxiety, but in an incredibly humorous way. She also has 2 dogs, and the dogs are throughout these comics, and they are hilarious. She does all of her drawings in paint, so these aren't like they're not in any way like the most glorious looking comics, but she is hilarious. I literally was laughing out loud. I just loved it. I don't know if she's coming back with another book at some point. That would be wonderful. She used to have a blog, and I think some of these comics were in that blog because I remember them. I remember quite a few of them, but there are some originals as well, and I just loved it, loved it, loved it. 2 5-stars that are totally parenting related. The first is Expecting Better, and the second is Cribsheet. So these are both written by Emily Oster, who is an economist. She basically looks at data and the studies surrounding pregnancy and early childhood. So Expecting Better just deep dives into pregnancy and all of the advice that you get and whether or not to listen to it, because you get so much advice when you're pregnant and like probably a million times more when you do have a baby. I am not looking forward to that in some ways, although sometimes it's very like kind-hearted. But she basically looks at all of it and goes, okay, here is what the data says. And she even deep dives into like, here are the studies that aren't good because they're not randomized, they're not large enough, and she only hones in on the studies that are really reputable and like reliable, basically. So in Expecting Better, she goes through everything from like, can you drink caffeine or not? What should you do during labor to bring on labor? So she really unpacks the old wives' tales, and also the regular advice that you get from the medical community as well. And I found it so helpful. Like, I've been writing my birth plan, and a lot of the stuff has come from this book. I just trust her. I personally just trust her. For Cribsheet, this is her latest book. It just came out very recently, like April of 2019. Cribsheet is looking at the data again of newborns when they're first born all the way to, I think, like 2, around there, like preschool age. And she deep dives into, you know, whether sleep training is good or bad. And she will also say when there is not enough data. And that's what I like about her. She just gives it to you straight. She's not biased. She's just giving you the information. She talks about breastfeeding in here and the pros and cons of breastfeeding, and just so much information. And it made me feel like I can go into motherhood a little more, I don't know, backed up by science. And you know, that doesn't mean that it will be a breeze because of that. I know that. And my experience might not work with the science. But I just like that, like, you get so much advice that's anecdotal, like this worked for me, but that same thing might not work for another parent or another baby. And so it just cuts through all of that and gives you, here's the science, do what you will with it. And I freaking love it. So grateful for her. I do think that she should write a book about infertility and the fertility process, because that would be immensely helpful. I had to do a lot of deep diving on my own during that process, and it was really hard. Really, really hard. So I might write her and mention that she should do that. And the last 5-star I have to share with you is, of course, none other than The Handmaid's Tale. I did a read along with a bunch of you for this book. Thank you so much for participating if you did. We used hashtag Handmaid's Tale 2019 over on Instagram, and then also on YouTube as well. I did a bunch of vlogs as I was reading it, and it was so interesting to read The Handmaid's Tale after dealing with infertility and having a different vantage point and perspective on Serena Joy, and B, while pregnant. That was an interesting combination. And then also, of course, in the climate that we are in, where, you know, women's rights are being stripped away from them kind of all over the place. It was just really fascinating. And this actually gave me a lot of confidence to reread some of my favorite books, because I loved reading The Handmaid's Tale again. I know that I don't do well rereading books when it's like I just read it last year or something, but if I give myself a few years, like I read The Handmaid's Tale the first time when I was in my early or mid 20s, and now I'm in my late 30s, and it packed just as much of a punch. It was fantastic. So yeah, thanks guys if you read that along with me. I really, really enjoyed that experience. It was a hard one to read while I was pregnant. I will say that. I needed a lot of fluffy stuff after that. Like, I'm reading thrillers now. You know? Yeah. Anyway, those are all of the books that I read in June. It was a great reading month for me. Did you have a 5-star book that you read? I'd love to know what that is, and I will talk with you soon. Okay, bye guys.